don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, we are live now.
Okay, well, good evening. I'm Dan Mahoney, president of the SIU system. I'm pleased to welcome you to our final conversation of understanding for the 2020-21 academic year. Nearly a year ago, we started these conversations of understanding after the murder of George Floyd, so I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge the significance of last week's verdict. The fact that Derek Chauvin is being held accountable for his actions is an important and significant progress in our justice system that has often failed to hold people accountable for acts of violence against Black Americans. However, I should note, when we have events like this, there's a tendency for some to feel like everything has changed and, quote unquote, we're all good now. However, this verdict is clearly not an end point. It's another step in a journey that we will continue to do a lot more work on going forward. Tonight, our panel will discuss issues related to race and athletics, and I'm going to start this conversation tonight by providing a historical overview and introduce some of the topics our panelists will discuss later. We've actually just celebrated the 74th anniversary of the breaking of the color line in Major League Baseball by Jackie Robinson. While there were Black American athletes before him, both in professional sports like boxing and in college athletics, including Mr. Robinson himself, who was a successful multi-sport athlete at UCLA, many view this as a key moment of change and an opening of opportunities for people of color in sports. In fact, much like last week's verdict, there's been a tendency for many to feel like we were all good after that. However, while this was a significant moment, and there were certainly positives over the last 74 years that can be and will be discussed tonight, there are also many myths related to what happened after the integration of baseball. Tonight, I'm going to highlight 5 of them to start us off. The first myth is that integration of sports came quickly and easily after Jackie Robinson's debut. The fact is, there continued to be significant resistance to integration in sports. It actually took 12 more years before the Boston Red Sox became the last team to sign a Black player. It took almost 20 years before the Southeast Conference, and it was Vanderbilt in this case, had one Black basketball player. And the University of Texas football team that won the national championship in 1969, over 22 years later, was still all white. The fact is, integration was slow and difficult in the years after Robinson. The second myth is that because people were now cheering for Black athletes and other athletes of color, this automatically changed their views related to race. While I do believe sports can be useful in changing our views, it is certainly by no means automatic. During the early years of integration, Black athletes, including Jackie Robinson, had to agree to much stricter rules regarding what they could do both on the field and in their personal life so they'd be more acceptable to white fans. And they often faced significant discrimination throughout their careers. While athletes today do not face the same rules that Jackie Robinson and others did at that time, there remains a limit to what fans will accept from athletes of color. When athletes in the 1960s and 70s took stands on racial injustice, or really any stand, they faced swift and severe reaction. Muhammad Ali may have been a national icon when he died, but he was widely disliked by most of America during the 1960s for his religious beliefs, his stands on racial injustice and the Vietnam War, and actually had his heavyweight title taken away for several years. After the famous victory stand moment with raised black glove fists at the 1968 Olympics, Tommy Smith and John Carlos were kicked out of the Olympic Village and sent home, where they received death threats and were ostracized by much of America's society for many years. More recently, we have seen similar reactions to the actions of Colin Kaepernick and others. The fact is, social activism by Black athletes has never been widely accepted, and there have always been limits to the support provided to athletes of color. Moreover, our perspective on sports and athletics is often impacted by our views on race. For example, one of the major issues in college sports has been whether we should pay athletes. Analysis of a 2014 survey indicates that the more negative view a white individual has of Black people, the more likely they are to be opposed to paying college athletes, likely because they perceive the benefits would largely go to Black athletes. The third myth is athletes of color took over sport and opportunities for white athletes somehow disappeared. Sports Illustrated even had a cover story in 1997 that was titled "Whatever Happened to the White Athlete" and showed an old picture of an all-white basketball team. The fact is, the white athlete has not disappeared, and white athletes can continue to be overrepresented among college athletes when compared to the percentage of white Americans in that age group. We have the impression that Black athletes are overrepresented among college athletes and in sports in general, because they are overrepresented in a few sports, two of which, football and basketball, are the most widely watched. In almost all of the other sports at the university level, Black athletes tend to be underrepresented and often significantly so. With few exceptions, such as boxing, it is similar in professional sports. And while we have some sports with diversity from other countries, when we look at domestic diversity, the percentage of participants from other racial groups, such as Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, tend to be much lower than for Black participants and well below their percentages in the overall population. Last month, we talked about intersectional discrimination during our conversation of understanding. So again, I'd be remiss if I did not point out that opportunities for women are less than men, and it is even lower for women of color, and opportunities for those with disabilities are even more limited. In recent months, we've seen legislation in several states limiting opportunities for transgender female athletes as well. So while we're focused tonight on race, there is much more we could discuss relative to providing equitable access to participation. The fourth myth is access to participation became equitable and purely merit-based, and therefore provided a great opportunity for social mobility. One study around 40 years after Robinson integrated baseball indicated that Americans actually believe sports provided the greatest opportunity for social mobility for Black Americans. However, any examination of sport, either historically or currently, will show that access to sport participation is very much based on socioeconomic status. And since people of color have less wealth in the United States, their access to participation opportunities is also less. A particular interest in recent years, given its significance in our discussion of the history of race in sport, is baseball. Due to the increasing importance of traveling baseball teams and other youth programs that favor the wealthy, the percentage of Major League Baseball players who are African American is actually less than half of what it was in the early 1980s, with some teams again having no African American players. The reality is sports participation has always favored the wealthy. In fact, our concept of amateurism originated with the British aristocrats who used it as part of their way of keeping the working class from being able to participate. The fifth myth is most of the wealth created by sport has gone to Black athletes. This is based primarily on the large salaries that are widely published of some professional athletes. However, this is a very limited view of economic opportunities coming from sport. When Dr. Harry Edwards pushed for Black athletes to boycott the 1968 Olympics, one of the things he demanded from Olympic officials was more Black coaches to match the increasing number of Black athletes. Over half a century later, opportunities in coaching administration for people of color still do not come close to matching the percentage of participants or the percentage in our population. These opportunities are particularly important at the college level because the wealth overwhelmingly goes to administrators and frankly to a much greater extent to coaches, while athletes are limited on the compensation they can receive. While the top athletes do tend to make more at the professional level than the coaches, their careers are significantly shorter on average, so their lifetime earnings still tend to favor head coaches over most professional players. And we haven't even gotten to the owners yet. When Jerry Richardson and his fellow investors sold the Carolina Panthers, they made over $2 billion in profit from that sale, clearly beyond the lifetime earnings of any professional athlete in history. There are also a large number of businesses who make money from their work with and for sport organizations. And again, minority-owned businesses have not received their share of the business. The fact is, the money made in the sport industry in the United States still overwhelmingly goes to people who are white and male. So overall, while there's certainly been advancements and positive impacts in sport over the last 74 years, there's still clearly a lot of work to be done. So tonight, we have an outstanding panel of experts who will address these and other issues related to race and athletics in much greater detail. I will now turn our conversation over to our moderator, who is a respected expert on this topic as well, Dr. Robin Hughes, Dean of the SIUE College of Education, Health, and Human Behavior. Dean Hughes.
Thank you. First, let me start off with saying thank you, President Mahoney, for opening up with a powerful commentary. Back in the day, I used to listen to a disc jockey, a radio disc jockey named Tom Joyner. And at the end of a really good commentary, he would claim that he had gone to church, so he would excuse himself from Sunday service. So I'm excusing myself from Sunday service because you just took me to church. Thank you, thank you. So I'm particularly moved by a good hook and content. And young folks often ask, are we good? And when they ask, are we good? It's a genuine inquiry about where they stand with someone else. Your hook was, we're good now. And it speaks to how we need to be more thoughtful about how racism and a whole lot of other isms influence and impact our decisions, and how they influence and impact how many people just live. And the journey, as you stated, it's indeed far from over. So welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be supporting this discussion on race in sports. What I would like to do today is introduce each panelist, not all right now, but one at a time. And I'm going to ask that they respond within 10 minutes, and I will give a signal at the halfway mark, and then another one at the 2-minute mark, old school, 5 minutes, and then 2 minutes left. And I won't shut you off, but I will shut you down. So after each has responded, I will open it up for discussion. 2 questions have already been submitted yesterday, and I'm looking in the chat room, and there are many, many questions. Hopefully we'll get through them all. So I'll begin after the last presenter. So to the panelists in general, I would like you all to respond to the complexity of race in sport and its influence in your current space and what that all means. However, I crafted a question based on your expertise in the discussion last week. So let's begin with Dr. Jude. In September 2020, the Denver Broncos announced their Inspire Change initiative to address social and racial issues. The program stems from discussions the players had amongst themselves, with team head coaches, with the president, CEO, general manager, president of football operations. All of that began on August 27th, after Jacob Blake was shot in Wisconsin. The discussions continued. In an article last night, Oscar Contreras stated that the Denver Broncos took their commitment to another level by announcing a new role that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In this press release last night, the Broncos announced they had hired Dr. China Jude as Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I just have to say, congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. And I think I speak for everyone in saying that we are all excited and just proud. Like, I've known you forever, and I told you that. I've been telling people, I know her. So in the discussion last week, you talked about economics of sporting, and that it was good for business in general, and that the economics of diversity, equity, and inclusion should play a role in this economic mix. But I'm not sure that we all have thought about what that means. You were very thoughtful. And I was very excited about that question, because I've given it some thought, but not to the depth. So you talked about taking into consideration that sporting and sports are a consumer-driven industry. We fill the stadiums, we fill it with all sorts of folks. However, women-owned and racial and ethnic businesses are not always engaged in the procurement process, because they may not have the infrastructure to go after big bids. And I thought, yeah, and they also may be purposefully excluded because of this network that is systemic. Can you talk to us about the business of sports within this nexus of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, thank you. I am so excited to be here and just honored to be a part of this discussion. So thank you, Dr. Mahoney. Thank you all for inviting me, and definitely being patient with my transition from the intercollegiate athletics level to the professional level. So this is my second day. However, my philosophies, my investment, my passion about the economics of diversity, equity, and inclusion has not changed. Despite me transitioning from the intercollegiate level to the professional level. And this is what I mean about economics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. and having the economic power to influence decision making. For an example, Major League Baseball made a drastic decision to move their All-Star game from Atlanta to Denver. That impacted a potential revenue of $100 million just by making that move. We have to take into consideration that in the issues of sports, it is considered a business, and we are on the intercollegiate level, we're in the business of providing great experience and taking care of our talented student athletes, as well as on the professional level, making sure that we're providing a quality entertainment value. I'm going to speak a little bit about the Nielsen Ratings. The Nielsen Ratings come out on an annual basis to discuss the economic power of media, different types of products, services in the industry of all various industry, but I'm going to stay narrow in scope in regards to the economic power of the African American community. You know, the Black buying power continues to grow and rising from a $320 billion starting in 1990 to $1.3 trillion in 2018. So that's a significant growth. And it goes to show that the buying power of the African American community can really influence many decisions that we do make. There are certain states that are going to be a little bit more influential, such as Texas, which now tops the nation in buying power for African Americans. And really, for the most part, with African Americans making up 23%, for an example, the total market of cell phones, just cell phones, 23%. It's amazing that 23% plays a significant difference on how we're communicating with each other. And we're only really consisting of 14% of the population. It is important when we're putting things together, whether it's programming initiatives, strategies to really make a significant difference when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, we need to take it in different phases. We need to first create awareness, then education, then processes, policies, and then impacting profits. And so that's what my focus is. It's based upon profits, and we must do a better job of actively recruiting women and ethnic minorities to be a part of procurement processes, specifically in RFPs. And that means we need to take more of a responsibility to educate businesses, small businesses, and those businesses that are being run by those marginalized communities to make sure that they are not only receiving the resources to understand the process, but also provide some additional incentives to support those larger organizations to consider those businesses. And I'll give you an example. I came from the University of Wyoming, the only university in the state of Wyoming, and I sought out a local barber. The local barber was 45 miles away. It was a business ran by an ethnic minority man who target providing barber services to military servicemen and women. And they also cut hair for the homeless. It was very important for us to establish a great relationship with this business and to assist them by bringing them onto the campus so they can cut hair for the ethnic minority community in Laramie, Wyoming. That was a great way of really providing those opportunities for that small local business to grow. We have to do a better job of recruiting those type of businesses and providing the necessary support so they can continue to grow, because that is going to eventually affect the GDP, the overall buying power of this country. And the more that, especially in this COVID climate that we're currently in, I can speak about LGBTQ plus, Hispanic American community. Those communities are trillions of dollars of buying power in a number of products and services that can really influence how this country can move. We must also do a better job of targeting those communities and making sure that we're supporting our media to especially small media markets in order to get people to be more involved and engaged. So with that in mind, when we were talking about HR, we're talking about how we can do a better job of being kind to one another, but economic power in underrepresented communities is going to make a significant difference on how we're moving forward.
Thank you. I'm always looking for a good framework, and you listed them, and I was writing them very quickly. You talked about 5 in particular: awareness, education, processes, policies, and profits. And it was a framework. I don't know whether you call it this, I may be just naming it for you, but a framework for economic opportunity and power, or in particular ways in, if one follows this particular framework, then there should be ways in which there are economic opportunities in this sporting space, economic space. So I certainly appreciate that. And would hope that you would follow up writing something about that, but I'll talk to you about that later. So Marcus Evans is the head coach for track, field, and cross country programs at SIUE. Marcus is also a former SIUE scholar athlete who returned to Edwardsville after spending the past 10 years at Lipscomb University. Started out as a graduate assistant coach, and then associate head coach. So thank you for participating in this panel. So let me share with the audience that not only do fans tell professional athletes like LeBron and Kaepernick to shut up and sit down and just play, or else. They don't say that or else, but it's there, it's the subtext. Collegiate athletes are routinely encouraged to speak up and get involved in the democratic process, yet folks are telling them to shut up and play as well, or else. So in essence, they are totally supposed to divest themselves from one part of student socialization. So this mantra of student first seems to have all sorts of strings attached for the student athlete, not for anybody else. They can speak up, protest, do whatever they want to on campus, but for the student athlete, student first, that we always hear from NC2A, and I feel very comfortable saying that. I'm going to sleep well at night talking about the NC2A. But there's strings attached. Can you talk in general, just from a coaching perspective, about how you and student athletes are navigating this climate of racism, social justice, and the disruption of it? And let me add that I see you as a coach and athletic staff and student athletes as very brave, because you have to tread in some very difficult space. I get to claim academic freedom. I have some protection with the armor of tenure. I can say pretty much anything, and it's really difficult to get rid of me. I study student athletes and race and racism. I write about it. I get the flack. I've seen the death threats. I go right home at night and I sleep well. How do you navigate this space, given your national platform? How do you do that?
I think it depends on what space you're in. I mean, I think that when you're looking at a basketball, football, some of the what they call revenue sports in our world, those are a lot more visible, and so there may be some light treading in that situation. What's really encouraging, I think, in this climate is that student athletes are finding their voice, whether that be social media platforms, marches, events that have been put on really in the last few years with some of the social injustices that you're seeing happen. Obviously, this comes from the top, right? So if you have an administration that isn't going to be as open to speaking out and speaking truth, that's going to be very difficult. And for a coach or a student athlete, your livelihood, your scholarship is going to be dependent on playing ball, right? Playing the game in which you're put in. We're really lucky here in the SIU system to have people, administration at the top that cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so anyone I would feel really comfortable speaking out, talking about things that they've experienced, other people are experiencing, and shedding light on maybe not things that they're personally experiencing, but people who look like them are experiencing. I mean, we have such a great platform in athletics to show what our world looks like when we go home, when the stage lights are off, when we're not on the court. And so, again, I know that's a very difficult answer. It's not really, doesn't give a lot of, I guess, closure, but it depends on your student athlete. I mean, when as an African American coach, in a situation where I was in the last 10 years at Lipscomb, I was one of a few or one of the only people of color in the office. And so there's a lot of code switching that may happen in that situation. I may be a little bit more raw and talk about, things that I'm experiencing, ways that I'm coping with my student athletes, especially who look like me, when I'm not really able to do that in a setting in the office with an AD or a head coach or whoever that might be. So, it can be very difficult to walk through that. Again, I'm one of those people that on Twitter, if I wouldn't say it to my grandmother, I probably am not going to say it in a social media setting. And so I've kind of taken that to heart, and that's one of the things that we talk about with our student athletes. But I like having conversations one-on-one more than social media, and I know the generation that we're coaching now is going to be more on social media, talking about the things that they feel, and I think that's great because I think it shows where we can go and where we need to move in terms of the social setting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate the comment, many comments, but the comment about discussions with one's grandmother, because I go totally off on social media. And my grandmother would have encouraged me to do so. And I know that my children who are in their 20s somethings learn a lot from their parents and their mother and grandparents. I also am intrigued by one of the things that you said was one is able to, you didn't use these words exactly, one is able to, it sounds like, be more comfortable in a space where you have support from administration there in athletics, as well as support through the ranks and upper administration. And I always wonder, where do faculty fall? And this is not a question for you, it's a question for faculty in general. Where are we when things happen with student athletes? We always claim students, but I'm like, but what about the ones over those are students too. What about those folks? When the Pac-12 and the Big Ten football players got together last year and they wrote the letter, their demand letter, sort of a demand letter, I don't remember faculty posting up with them. And it just it didn't fall totally flat, but there wasn't the support that I wanted to see from folks like us. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith is an assistant professor of sociology at SIUE, and he is going to be on my advisory board. I have told him at least 4 or 5 times since he arrived what he was going to do, and you're going to do that. So you'll be on my advisory board of my journal when I get off of this phone, off of this Zoom call. So he teaches in the area of sociology of sport, social inequalities, race and ethnic minorities, intro to sociology, and sports protest movements. So Dr. Smith, sports is often talked about as a vehicle for social change. In your own work, you've explored boxing culture and its racial tropes that come along with that. While your work is situated in historical space, can you speak to how historical underpinnings of race and racism still impact sporting today and how it is, in fact, a vehicle for social change? And I'm specifically thinking about like the things that, and you don't have to speak to Mizzou specifically, but the events that have occurred at Mizzou and at other institutions like 215, 216, 217. I'm always wondering, did they not get the memo in 1960? Because not the students, but the universities. This happened in 1960. The children told us what to do in I was but a child. But in the 1960s, this already occurred. What has taken us so long?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I just want to, say thank you to yourself, Dr. Hughes, Dr. Mahoney, Dr. McNeese, everybody for inviting me to, have this conversation about race and sport. And sports is something that I love. I myself was an amateur boxer. So to be able to have an opportunity to discuss this, I truly appreciate it and just want to thank everybody and everybody on this panel as well. Before we dive into sports, I know we've been, kind of talking and we've been kind of talking around this a little bit, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge that race is a social construction. All right. In other words, race and racial meanings have been understood as a way to classify people based on physical characteristics within a racial hierarchy and to justify unequal treatment. This racialized process, especially in the sport world, reflects our society's stereotypes about people of color and even encourages wrong and sometimes malicious thinking. In America, when we talk about race, we also tend to fall into the trap of discussing race as a white and black binary. I think this becomes much more complex when we discuss sport via the popular American sports. For instance, football, basketball, and baseball. So to focus specifically on the popular sports leaves us at sort of somewhat disadvantaged towards understanding the lived experiences of Latinx, Asian American, Native American, and other cultures that participate in the less popular sports, such as boxing, tennis, track and field, et cetera. So their existence in a broad world of sports also matters. I think their voice matters as well. So I think it's important for us to have that intersectional lens as we discuss sports. This helps us to understand athletes from all walks of life that have had a profound impact on social change. And So with that said, I like to discuss sport as a vehicle of social change and kind of what we're seeing today. And the first is really, we've kind of brought it up here and there, Colin Kaepernick and the era of Black Lives Matter. So why does this matter, right? Why is this significant today? Well, many things that we are seeing are reminiscent of the past. When I see Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, and the WNBA, I think of Wilma Rudolph, the first Black woman to win 3 gold medals in the 1960 Olympics. Keep in mind, she also overcame polio. And when she won, she was essentially wanting her hometown to be integrated during her homecoming parade. And that happened. I also think of Althea Gibson, the first Black player to win the French Wimbledon and US Open. She was bad. And I always like to reference Althea Gibson as sort of the Jackie Robinson of tennis. Her achievements, really helped to integrate that sport. And then I also think of Rose Robinson, a high jumper who refused to stand for the national anthem 60 years before Kaepernick even decided to kneel, right? And so what we're seeing today is present day athletes carrying on tradition of past athletes and pioneers. But the goal is still the same, right? Fighting against systemic racism and oppression in a multiple social platforms in our country. So when I see the most recent examples of Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the anthem, the wearing of shirts that state "I can't breathe," or the names of fallen men and women that have died at the hands of police, I see the history of Ali, Tommy Smith, and John Carlos, which is on my shirt, via Mexico City, 1968, right? And so these disruptions and stances continue to be a way to promote the fight against racism and police brutality in this country. A message of solidarity and awareness in the fight against social inequalities. And so these expressive messages from athletes have made us understand the reasons why athletes are protesting. They are using their voice in the best ways they know how to, doing things that they love and expressing themselves while doing it in sport. And yet these disruptions has been met with opposition. Dr. Hughes, you alluded to that, right? You have people like Trump, Laura Ingraham, and others who are calling for athletes to shut up and dribble, and that athletes have no right to speak up about political or social issues. And, this narrative to me is not only extremely racist and trying to silence many Black athletes, but it's also an attempt to devalue an athlete's humanity, right? You are nothing more than an athlete, so what you say doesn't matter. And what we're starting to see is it does matter, right? Big time. Their voices are voices of concerned citizens as well, not just athletes. Athletes also have been inspired and inspire others. What we know about youth is that they have a gendered, racialized, and or ethnicized connection with athletes and other entertainers. So sport is much more than a game for so many. It's a part of their culture, voice. When athletes are, passionate about something, they are using a space that they know the best in how to communicate. They are expressing who they are in a unifying space, and we should listen. So is sport a vehicle for social change? I think that without sports, we wouldn't be where we are today. And having these kinds of conversations about the power of what they bring towards awareness, right? That was another key word that I heard earlier. And I think, we will continue to see the voice of the people in our sports for years to come. There's a whole history that informs us of the power of sports, and it continues to show us that sports are an important social fabric of our culture. And as we see in the case of the Mizzou football team, refusing to play or canceling a game, these disruptions really, stops us in our tracks and makes us think about it all. Why are these things happening, right? So sports are that powerful. Athletes and administrative voices are that powerful. And I think we are living in a historical time now where we are seeing protests in sports growing and becoming a social phenomenon. Now, not all athletes choose to make that stand, right? In fact, there are a few that are very silent to certain cases because they don't want to hurt their endorsements, right? For example, O.J. Simpson and your Michael Jordans, right? But those that choose to are making a conscious decision, a sacrifice, so to speak. And I think that those are very pivotal in helping things, helping us move towards change in our society.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you began with a quickie discussion about the social construct and how we all decided. I don't want to say we because I didn't, but how folks decided that race is really a thing. That's what the young people always claim, that is that a thing? Well, we decided through a series of handshakes that, yeah, it is a thing, and it is a way to stereotype, and it is a way to act in racist ways. I also like that you brought up that when folks tell young people that they don't have a voice or that they should shut up and dribble or just shut up and play, that they are going against the very, like, the guiding principles of higher education, and that is to speak up, to say something, to engage in the political and democratic process. And so they're telling them, I know you can't do that. So when we don't say anything, we being like faculty members don't saying anything, then we're going against what we say that we do. So I have issues with faculty and all of this as well. So thank you very much. We will move on to Liz. Liz Jernigan. Jernigan was promoted to Director of Athletics at SIU September 2019 after serving for 1 year as the department's Senior Woman Administrator and Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director. During her first year at the university, she reshaped Saluki athletics and hired 7 coaches. She also assisted in the reorganization of the department's administrative structure. I think it is so important to note that she headed up the 7 searches. I served as a faculty athletic rep, and the searches are so very different from the searches for a faculty member. Athletics does not play when it comes to, they are quick and there is some hardball. I mean, I would leave sometimes like I need a Kleenex. I was like, did you really ask all that? And they were able to answer those questions without crying. So I appreciate that. Liz is also a strong advocate for student athletes and serves on the NC2A Olympic Sports Liaison Committee. I could not imagine the conversations that might occur in the context of athletic administration, specifically in these current times, from administrative hiring of people of color to recruiting student athletes from racially diverse backgrounds in sports that have been historically white and sometimes just purposely white. And what happens after folks arrive on the campus. What sort of retention efforts are made, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk to us about how race impacts coaching and administration and like what that might mean? Does race influence the decision-making, et cetera?
I found myself on mute. Roderick was kind enough to point out that I wasn't on mute a while ago. Pardon me. Thank you for that. That's a really great question. And at some point today, I want to talk a little bit about our history of diversity and inclusion at in athletics at Carbondale because it's fascinating with regard to this topic. But what diversity means and the value of that to our administration and our coaches is virtually everything. And you think about a basketball team, you put together a successful team by putting together a collection of diverse skills and strengths. I'm not aware of very many basketball teams that are very successful if they're made up of all post players. Diversity and strengths is paramount to the success of the team. Likewise, for a football team, you know, the offensive lineman is critically important to the success of a team. But if we put together a football team of all offensive linemen, we're not very likely to be successful. And so again, the diversity of skills and talents and abilities is what is a huge component to success and winning and strength. Similarly, you think about great coaches. When they put together and amass their coaching staffs, they don't likely put together a staff of people with the same coaching background or strengths as they do. I was a volleyball coach for many years, and my strength was with hitters and passing. My top assistant needed to be a setters coach, et cetera, because then we're stronger and as a group. So the concept of diversity is not at all foreign to sports and athletics. And so when you apply that to recruiting a diverse set of leaders for our department as administrators and coaches, to recruiting a diverse group of student athletes to our programs, it all makes sense. It all make people from different areas of the country. Foreign student athletes, we find have great value to many of our programs. Students of color to be included. It's just a component of what it means to be successful in a competitive environment of athletics.
Thank you, Liz, and please share the history if you'd like to.
Yeah, well, I had something that I was going to read, but I'm not going to at this point. But I feel like my job tonight would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about Donald Boydston, who is credited for diversifying the athletic department at Carbondale back in the 50s. He's credited with recruiting African-American student athletes to Carbondale and diversifying as a result the campus as well. And so a good friend of ours who's on this Zoom, Todd Bryson, his father has written some things about Dr. Boydston. And I would just draw everybody's attention, if you're curious to know the fascinating story of the wonderful young men who many of them ended up with doctorate degrees and leaders in our community and leaders at academic leaders at Carbondale. Get a hold of this little memoir that I had the privilege of reading last week about Dr. Boydston, and it'll make you very proud. When we're talking about issues back in the 60s, this man was making a difference back in the 50s on our campus. So I just wanted the opportunity to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If you want to give us the title, we can probably get it in the.
A Man of Vision.
Okay.
Donald Boydston.
Okay.
If you want to get a hold of it, let me know. I have a few copies.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. And also appreciate how you have spoken to not only his work, but the work in general that occurs in athletics to purposefully look for people who are good at in particular things. And I say that because sometimes during searches, I've heard it here in my own school, that we can't find anything, or we can't find them, meaning the them are the Black folks. And I'm like, well, they're not mystical creatures for some odd reason over in athletics. They're able to find all sorts of Black people. So maybe we need to go get some lessons from, march over there and find out why they tend to go to a basketball court to look for people who play basketball, and they may go to a golf course to find folks who play golf. When we go to our conferences and we're looking for faculty of color, then you would probably attend a SIG where there are faculty of color. They may not be in the study of whatever. I don't want to misspeak, but but I do know that we're not. If you can't find them, you ain't looking. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So Tim Hall, Athletic Director, SIUE, serves as the 8th Director of Athletics in the university history. He previously served as Director of Athletics at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. During his time at UMBC, the Retrievers men basketball program I have to talk about this because I know everybody was watching. I was, and then I go back and watch it again. Where the number 16 seed upset the number 1 seed and stunned Virginia in 2018. And I watched it so much, I was like, was it 3 years ago? I thought that was last year. Well, it was last night because that's when I watched it. During that time, it seemed like there were millions of, did I lose him?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here, okay.
I'm here.
Sorry about that. I thought maybe I had gone somewhere because I have shaky internet. So during that time, it seemed like there were millions of items being solicited. And I'm always looking at the sales and where the money may reside. So if someone were quoting my work and making a profit, I would ask for my share. And I absolutely do that all the time. It's called royalties. I have never been able to understand the illogic when it comes to athletics. Dancers are paid, musicians are paid, actors are paid beyond their scholarship. They get paid, but it just doesn't happen in athletics. So before I go on this tirade, I would like to ask you to talk about likeness and image and what that means in terms of race and resources for, in particular, athletes, but marginalized student athletes.
Sure. Appreciate the question, and also appreciate having the opportunity to be with all of my esteemed colleagues here to talk about such an important topic. And I want to mention a couple of things as sort of a precursor to answering your question. And those are, from the outset, in terms of how I lead our department, I really believe nobody is served unless we are all served. And this quote I want to read is having more significance to me here lately. My father and I were very close when he passed in February, but he shared with me early on a quote by a moral philosopher named John Rawls, who said, "The veil of ignorance asks us to judge society based on whether we join it without knowing what our place would be in it." And I think that's so impactful because it is important for us with white privilege, those of us with white privilege, to help each other understand that there has not been a just society for our Black brothers and sisters. And so, as Rawls says, whether we would join it without knowing our place in it, I don't think people would. And our society has not been just for Black people, and that's something that we certainly need to change. And I also, as a leader, remind myself of a statement, and then I ask myself a question. The statement is, everybody is somebody's son or daughter. So if everybody is somebody's son or daughter, what would I want if that were my child? Or if I don't have children, or for those who don't have children, what would you want? And for me, it's respect, honor, dignity, and civility to everybody. So how does that tie into name, image, and likeness? As an athletic practitioner who's done this his entire career, I can tell, especially at the highest level of intercollegiate athletics, those that would be under the moniker of BCS or Power 5 individuals, have been the student athletes. And in your question, you were correct in mentioning that, yes, other general students can make money off of their name, image, and likeness, and it is time for that to happen in intercollegiate athletics. And I think all too often, when I have come along in this business over the years and seen who have had opportunities, even just to work part-time jobs or do some things outside of athletics to help their financial situation, it has been overwhelmingly white male and female student athletes. And that's something that certainly is not right. And if you look at the construct and the culture of how the NCAA has been, and what I really believe was the most recent wave of Power 5 conference realignment that brought such large sums of money from these TV contracts, that what ended up happening, in my opinion, was that those institutions at that level and those conferences started spending all of this money, probably honestly as a practitioner. Yes, they were thinking about the student athlete welfare, but I don't think they were doing it really in terms of what would be the best for these individuals in terms of them having an opportunity to be compensated, if you will, for the fact that it is their name, it is their image and likeness, their success on fields and courts and what have you. So I think the direction that the NCAA is going is right. It's more than time for this to happen. I hope there's some type of federal congressional intervention, because I don't see how it works with 50 states doing 50 different types of plans. But for our student athletes, it's time that this happens.
Thank you, Tim. And I also thank you for actually putting out there that NCAA is moving in the right direction. I think that is like one of the most positive things that I could say. That there are lots of wrong directions that organizations take. I won't name any, but I am very happy that they are moving in the right direction. I was looking at a list of states, I think last night, that had sort of approved something that looked like a ruling on the likeness and pay. I'll have to go back to it. I'm not able to speak intelligently about it at all. Ooh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you. Let's move on to Rodrick Campbell. So Rodrick is a Northwestern alum and current SIUE Saluki graduate student. He is also a scholar athlete. On January 20th, Rodrick Campbell tweeted, "You may not end up where you thought you were going, but you will always end up where you are meant to be. Next chapter." So during my stalking last night, I went to your Twitter feed and I pulled that from your Twitter. Uh-oh, I think I've lost everyone.
We can hear you.
I've got Tim. Okay. All righty. So I pulled that from your Twitter feed. I thought it was pretty profound. I was talking to a colleague who I'm trying to recruit to the institution, and I found that during my stalking session. So I read it to them and said, now, doesn't that change your mind? And this particular colleague has 3 sons and one plays football. And all I had to do was tell her that. And I was like, I have got her. But thank you for that. I thought it was prolific. So you've heard from many of the folks today, including myself, who have walked this earth for many moons. Can you share with us from your perspective how race and racism impacts you both as a scholar and an athlete? And I don't know that one can separate those. I think that they're part of your identity. I walk into a room and I'm always Black and a female, always. So I can't separate them. And I have a child who plays sports, and I always think of her as a Black female student, all those 3. So can you talk to us about that?
Yes, I would say the first thing with especially being a Black student athlete is a lot of the stereotypes that you have to deal with versus both internal and external. Being a student athlete, starting at Northwestern, which is a top university in the country, it's always the question of, do I really belong here in the classroom? And I would get that from, the other students who aren't athletes, and get looks in the classroom like, oh, like, you're an athlete, you're a football player, you don't really belong here. You didn't really get here on your own merit. And, that bothered me, during my first couple of years when I was still trying to figure out who I was as a person. And I'm not going to lie, my first quarter at Northwestern, it was a struggle because I had to deal with football, deal with new time management on top of a rigorous school schedule. And I started to believe, what those people were saying, like, oh, I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough. I'm not really cut out to be this person who can attend Northwestern University. And as a student athlete, you kind of internalize that, and you think to yourself, okay, maybe all I am is just an athlete, and I'm going to stick to that, and I'm going to put school on the back burner. And a lot of people can fall into that type of mentality, which I quickly realized is wrong. And that as a student athlete, I realized that I have a special and a unique platform, to be able to talk about the things that are on my mind. And I wish I had the same level of courage that I do now as I'm older. And I could probably, relate that to me, growing and maturing. But I remember my freshman year was 2016, and that was the year that Colin Kaepernick first kneeled. And I was a person who has always been very, conscious, very aware of, things that are going on. And we were doing like a walkthrough before the first game of the season. And we did the national anthem. It was like a mock game just to get ready. And I was the only person to take a knee. And after that, I kind of got crazy looks from some of my teammates. And then I, had to talk to the head coaches and assistant coaches like, hey, like, we're not saying that you can't do it, but, you have to be ready for, the flack that is going to come with that. And, you've been a freshman. Are you ready for that? And I just think, if I were to have that conversation now, it'll be a lot different, because I feel like a lot more people are, comfortable in having these conversations, especially since the George Floyd situation. And that's something that I think about a lot. And also, being a student athlete who is Black, you have to sometimes carry the burden of explaining different situations to your other teammates who aren't Black and who may not understand but want to. And then you have those who are just choosing to remain ignorant. So you feel like there's a burden for you to represent your whole race, being a Black student athlete. And this, I can even say, not even just for student athletes, this is for, Black students across the country who aren't athletes, because, at a predominantly white institution, we're going to be the minority. And you do all these things, you have, Zoom calls like this, you try to educate people, and you realize people are going to change if they want to. They're going to go out and be educated if they want to. You can't force it. You can't say, hey, like, did you see this? Do you empathize with me? Can you feel what I'm feeling? And you can't force that on people. And, that's something that I found just kind of being here for the last year. It's a lot of people, who say, they want to do the work of, being an ally. And, their ally work stops at, posting a Black square on Instagram or Twitter. And it's just like, it's frustrating because it's like the popular thing to do now. Mm-hmm. It's okay to do it. And I say this all the time, with, my teammates and my friends and, my family. We live in a culture where, no one wants to be canceled. And quite frankly, I get pissed off when I see, these big companies such as, Netflix and Nike, whatever, saying like, oh, like this is, we stand with Black people, and it's all for profit. It's all for money. And as a student athlete, I feel like it's more important than ever, that we stand up and we say things and we speak our hearts, because if we don't, no one would ever know how we feel or what we go through. And we're much more than just, athletes. And I think that's something that people around the country are starting to learn. They're starting to learn that, our voice have power, and we're not just going to shut up and dribble or do whatever it is that, people on the outside think that we should. So being a student athlete is something that I hold of a special responsibility. And I know that for me, this is only the beginning, and I do everything in my power to just pay it forward. The first year who coming through SIU or Northwestern, I make sure to know or tell them, hey, like, this is, 4 or 5 years of your life where you're going to grow, you're going to learn things, you're going to meet people, but never sacrifice what you believe in because you feel like you have to acquiesce to a system that's not really meant for you to thrive in. It's not really meant for you to thrive in unless you're producing on the field or on the court or, on the track or whatever it might be, because you have to realize, this college, athletics is a business. And sometimes people, get too much caught in, oh, like the coaches said this, the coaches said that. And I have to realize, like, hey, this is, it's business. Like, like this is how people put food on their children's table. So it's just like, why would I sacrifice who I am or something that I want to say, truly want to say? And I know, Mr. Evans was saying like, hey, like, if you put something on Twitter or social media, you want to make sure that your grandma is going to approve of it. And I'm kind of the same way, but I feel like lately it's no time for me to hold back what I really feel. And whether that be, on cases, politically, whatever it might be, I'm just not the type of person to want to, hold that back, because I feel like knowing that how important my voice is as a student athlete today, it can help, student athletes in the future and, create an environment to where, things like these or this call are common. Because I'm not going to lie, when I was a freshman, I couldn't imagine being on a call with, top administrators, the athletic directors from different schools. It's just something that I couldn't fathom, because I felt like, oh, I'm a student athlete. I'm going to stay in my place. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. And I'm going to go about my business and just do football and school. And that's it. nothing else, no type of identity to where I'm really putting my 2 cents on the societal issues and political issues that, we live in today. So yeah, my views on student athlete is twofold. It's kind of like a burden and a curse, but it's also something that I hold very dear to my heart and realize that, it's always work to do. And I'm in the position to inspire others.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate your comments and took some notes and would encourage you to write as well. There were several things that you said, and I don't know that you know the background of some of the things that you mentioned. So you talked about something that looked a whole lot like one of the tenets of critical race theory. You talked about interest convergence. I don't know that you know what that is, but you did. So look that up. You also talked about getting in good trouble. So when you made the comment about your grandmother and making the comments on social media, you talked about getting in good trouble, and John Lewis would talk about that. You talked about institutionalized racism, and you didn't use that language, but that's exactly what you were speaking to. You talked about racial performance. You didn't use that language, but that's what you talked. You have a lovely little paper. I've heard 3 papers in here, and I'm encouraging all people to do what I tell them to do. I was so disturbed, but I've heard this many times about student athletes and how student athletes in particular will go to class and students feel so comfortable telling them what they cannot do and who they are not and how they're not smart, as if they are the instructor or they've given them some sort of exam, et cetera. Just the pathology of that discourse just drives me bonkers. But thank you very much for your comments. I certainly appreciate it. And thank you all. We do have many questions in the chat room. So I'm going to start with one that I would like to answer, but I'm not going to. It's an easy one. So why do athletic directors and coaches receive higher pay than most college professors?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that.
Who's talking?
I think that's Tim, but he's breaking up.
Okay.
I think it's Mark.
Yeah, Tim, we can barely hear you.
Rodrick mentioned. That's Tim. Can you hear me?
Sounds a
I'm
little
sorry, I'm in a
robotic.
hotel. It's not great.
Oh, okay. I could hear you then.
Can you hear me better now? No?
Mm-hmm.
All right, hold on. Somebody.
Well,
Uh-oh.
I can touch on it from a coach's perspective. I think there are, when we try to answer this question, or when maybe the person was framing this question, they're probably thinking about some of your money making sports, basketball, football, even baseball. I'm coming from the perspective of a non-revenue sport. I know I mentioned that before. Olympic sports is what we like to call them, because nobody likes to talk about the revenue they don't make. But when you're talking about golf, tennis, track and field, softball, maybe even some of the sports that have lower ticket numbers, or no ticket numbers in particular, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect in what you're seeing compared to some of our colleagues who are faculty. I think faculty are much more protected in some ways in university settings. And so again, from an Olympic sport perspective, you're seeing lower pay probably on average than faculty on campus. On the other side of things, no matter how you look at it, as a coach, as a head coach, I kind of look at it as like a middle management structure, right? So you are handling budgets, taking care of multiple student athletes and staff members on that level. And so there should be a high compensation or a compensation that comes with that, especially when you're talking about putting butts in the seats and high ticket numbers when it comes to Power 5 programs and things like that. So I think that, all of those put together is maybe why you see some coaches get paid higher numbers. But I think there is a little bit of a misconception when it comes to the rest of us who coach in the NCAA and the money that we make.
Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I apologize. I was just going to say, as Rodrick mentioned, it's a business. And, there's been this unbelievable exponential growth, primarily in football and in men's basketball. And, it's been market driven. And I tell people all the time, the reason the NCAA rule book is really big is because at one time it was small, and then somebody found a way to circumvent a rule. So they put new rules in, and then people found a way to circumvent those rules. So they put more rules in, and it grew up. It went from like this to this thing like that. That's what's happened with coaches' salaries. There was this insatiable desire to win, and pressure from outside entities on the academy to say put a great team out there almost at all costs, and we'll help you do that. And so, $100,000 for a coach's salary became $250, and $250 became $500, and $500 became $750, because we'll just out-duel for the best coaches. I heard Carol Cartwright, who I worked for at Kent State, who was on the night commission. She said, the escalating salaries will stop when all the presidents decide they're just not going to do it. And it's just not gotten to that part because of a lot of external factors that I think play a role in it. It's been market driven.
I would completely agree with Tim. It's a business, and it is market driven. There's another component that I would just throw out there. This came up on a Crossroads diversity training that I was a part of last week, and about having the ability or the courage to recruit a diversity in faculty. And that the point was made that on our campus, we sometimes get outbid for the person of color that we're trying to get to come and be the next leader in our sociology department or what have you. And similarly, we face that in the hiring process for the top diverse leaders in athletics. And so we have to be able to identify resources or reallocate resources, however that looks, to make sure we're willing to invest in that right person that adds diversity to our leadership for our young people.
There was a question that was emailed last night. If your team, baseball, softball, soccer, swimming, diving, or golf, is a majority white, how do you actively recruit athletes from diverse backgrounds?
Would you want to take that first? You want me to?
Sure. I'll go first this time.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to be intentful. Of course, you've got to I think stay engaged with, the governing bodies of your particular sport, and stay connected on through the governing bodies on, hotbeds across the country that are particularly focused on developing underserved youth from potentially lower socioeconomic backgrounds in those sports. Our women's golf team currently has a Black student athlete on the team. That's a rare thing. If you look across the country at collegiate golf programs, our coach worked hard to get connected, to be able to identify, quality Division I caliber student athletes that would add diversity to the program. I know we recently made a change in our leadership in our volleyball program, and virtually overnight, the number of ethnic minorities that are represented on that team increased dramatically. And so there's an intentful, purposeful focus on the recruiting efforts that has to be put in to ensure that you're recruiting for diversity, and that it's not just some words that we put out there, but it's through actions and work.
I can expand on that, similar to what Liz said. We talk in our department about IRBs, and that's not institutional review boards. We leave that to the academicians, but we say IRB, intentional relationship building. And how do you build those relationships, coaches? I'm going to challenge you, if you don't have relationships with coaches or at high schools or club coaches, for softball or baseball, where there are a higher percentage of minorities, you have to build those relationships. And I've had coaches, part of it is socioeconomic, right? So I'll say this compared to like Power 5 programs. Our budgets are smaller by more than a fraction of some of our colleagues at the highest level. And so I have had coaches before, say, my recruiting budget is so small, I can't go much out of this certain geographic area. And if the geographic area just doesn't have a high percentage of minorities competing, I say, okay, well, we're going to put more money into your budget so that you can intentionally recruit minorities. That's another way that I have said, if what you're saying to me is you're attempting to build the relationships, we still don't have a presence because I can't be out building. All right, well, we're going to put money in the budget, and then we're going to ensure that the money is used to do that intentional relationship building to recruit minorities by increasing the budget to be able to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Jude, there are a couple of questions in here for you. One is, what advice would you give to women and people of color seeking leadership roles in sports?
Great question. So of course, making sure you have the proper education and professional development. Networking plays a significant difference. I'm really happy that I know Tim and Liz. And so, and to continue to go outside of your comfort zone to take on new challenges and meet new people. I know that when I had the opportunity to lead Queens College in New York City, I was there 7 years as the assistant vice president there, and left there to go to Wyoming. That was a major step. But that decision was extremely intentional. I wanted football in my portfolio, and if you can tell, it worked out well. But I wanted to also have the opportunity to work in environments where there was not a lot of diversity, so I can have a bigger impact on so many levels when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that really does make a significant difference. Sometimes, we ask as ethnic minority staff members, faculty, administrators, we expect others to be uncomfortable and be courageous in having uncomfortable conversations or being in those uncomfortable spaces. Well, as an ethnic minority, we need to challenge ourselves in that same way. Along with that, there are a lot of great organizations as well. I'm the president of the Minority Opportunities Athletics Association, which reaches across all 3 NCAA divisions, junior college and NAIA. So to be a part of an organization that has created a community of ethnic minority administrators in all different areas in an athletics department, and to be able to connect in that kind of way and serve on committees and learn and grow in a safe, nurturing environment, as well as coaches organizations. I'm sure Coach Evans can, cite a number of coaches organizations to connect as well. But I think that the networking makes a significant difference, but I do need to point out, you don't necessarily have to network with thousands and thousands of people. You have to be very strategic in your networking. That's very important, and to connect with those individuals who are willing to serve as allies, mentors, or champions. And that makes a significant difference. By the way, I do want to point out for that MOA, I want to thank Dr. Mahoney for serving. Not only is an award recipient, the Charles Whitcombs Award recipient from MOA, but also he'll be serving as one of our leaders for the President's and Chancellor's Advisory Group to allow us to continue to grow in the organization to help advocate for underrepresented populations.
A question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm good.
So there's a question in here for the student, but I think it's open to anyone. So I'm asking anyone to respond to it before I do. Are most Black athletes aware of the odds against them becoming pro? If not, why not? If yes, why do they pursue the goal anyway? I'm trying my best.
The odds are very, very low. It's lower, especially on the basketball side. At least on football, you have your final 53-man roster in that regards. But I truly believe, and like I said, I'm transitioning from the G5 environment, where we did have a number of student athletes that actually went pro. And now looking at these guys right now for this great organization that I work for, I believe, and Tim can speak on the basketball side, Liz can speak on the basketball side. I believe they know, but they're very confident in their skill set, that they feel that they can defy those odds. And personally, as someone who has spent a lot of time with our student athletes when I was at Wyoming, my job was to create not only an inclusive culture there, but to make sure to support those student athletes of color, to provide them with all the necessary resources so their head is right, so they can go after that. Now, some may hit it big, others may have to sit and wait and try it again on the next go round. But I really believe in higher education, we want to provide all of the necessary support to make sure that these student athletes succeed in something.
Yeah, I spent years at the FBS level of academic support for student athletes. And we shared the data with our student athletes. And I always also shared, because we knew they thought they were planned to be the exception, shared with them that we wanted to support them and their chasing that dream, and also wanted to be there to help support them for their backup plan, which would be that academic degree. So we use the data to help them chase their dreams and realize that that backup dream was important too.
That's good to hear. That's very good to hear. That question really bothers me. First, because it's always directed to the Black athlete. And I don't think that they're asking that question about the folks who are in dance, who want to become professional dancers, the singers who think they are Beyonce or T.I. or whomever, the folks who want to become astronauts, the people who want to become president. Everybody's baby is going to be the next president. You've seen the stick figures on the back of everyone's car, and everybody has the brightest child in the world. None of those have cured cancer yet. Most haven't performed open heart surgery. But I just don't understand. Actually, I do understand why that question is always asked of the Black student athlete. It is a loaded and coded question. And the odds of becoming a university professor, if you're Black and female, is about the same as the odds of becoming a Black basketball player. So I am committed to dribbling every day because I can become a basketball player. And in my head, I have told Dr. Mahoney millions of times, I am a point guard. So Celtics, y'all need to get ready because I'm coming. Okay, next question.
Dr.
Let's
Hughes, you could just
see.
drop the mic on that one. You know, you could just drop the mic on that.
That's one of my practice. I go in the mirror when I was in high school and practice with curveballs. So I still practice on that one. That one drives me bonkers, as well as why professors are not paid as much as someone in athletics, and to please pay me as much as the dean of the med school. I mean, I don't understand that question. Or even the dean of engineering. We're all the same. We should all be paid the same, right? How do we sound? This is capitalist America. That just irks me. Okay, I'm done with my diatribe there. Let's go.
No matter what decision, what we're talking about, it all goes back to money.
Right.
The economics, everything goes back to money every single time.
Yeah.
And that is something that we need to embrace. We deal with money on an everyday basis, whether we're negotiating a salary, whether we're talking about NIL, whether we're dealing with goods and services. It all goes back. And so what we need to do as underrepresented and marginalized communities is to take that into consideration of the power that we have in order to move this country. I mean, the gross domestic product, which is the value of all of the products manufactured and goods provided within this particular country in a specific period, can really make a significant difference when we're strengthening Black and Brown and underrepresented communities. If we do not strengthen ourselves, it could play a significant difference in decreasing the GDP. When you decrease the GDP, what happens? Unemployment, businesses are shutting down, just like what happened with COVID. There were a lot of businesses that shut down. Now, as the vaccine is coming around, and I hope that everyone is in support of that. I've been vaccinated myself. We're trying to get our kids back in school, because if we get our kids back in school, what's the next part? We go back to work. We go back to work. we start generating business, goods, services, and products. You start building up the GDP again, impact taxes or reduce taxes, things like that. So no matter what decision we make, it's always going to be about economics.
You're absolutely correct. It is about where the money resides. So Dr. Smith, there's a couple of questions for you. What do you see in the future for activism by athletes? And do you believe that there is more that they could do?
I mean, I see, more and more athletes standing up for a cause they believe in. And I can see athletes, essentially more invested in social institutions that are geared towards helping those in need or in crisis. I think that the future of a lot of athletes that are standing up are very inspirational. I think that, as I had kind of mentioned earlier, I think that a lot of athletes, they have a gendered, racialized, and ethnicized connection with youth. And so youth are seeing these, they're seeing the history of all these things, and, that can facilitate change in a number of different ways. And so when I think of the future of activism, I think it's only going to get bigger, essentially with, social media and these kind of newer platforms where a lot of athletes can, voice themselves in so many different ways. Now, there's so many other layers, right? It's not just about race anymore. It's about gender. It's about, sexual orientation and so many other social problems that we have that sport is helping others to be more aware of. And so when I think about it, when I think about where it's going, I think it's only going to get bigger. I think about Mizzou. I think about, when they were protesting, just that stop alone, right? We were just talking about economics, right? When these athletes decide that I'm going to sit this one out, that's hurting someone's pockets, right? And badly. And I think that showed the power of, some of these athletes making that conscious decision. And so, with that question, I think it's only going to get bigger, to be honest. Do I think that some athletes, can do more? Sure. I do think that athletes can do more. I do think, how they do that is being more involved with the community, having these kinds of conversations, a lot of what Mr. Rodrick Campbell was talking about earlier. I've heard these stories before, and I've heard them from student athletes sitting in my office talking about these things, right? To add to what Dr. Hughes was saying, he's talking about the double consciousness as well, right? A lot of these students are experiencing these things. And so we as educators should have an opportunity to sit down with them, talk with them, and, hear them out, because they're trying to do this in so many different platforms. And it's, and when they're on that stage, it's our turn to listen. So I think that, protest is only going to get bigger in sport.
Appreciate it. But a couple other questions, and I think we need to move to Dr. Mahoney. So who is the athletic diversity and inclusion designee, I guess, on your particular campuses? Is it a senior level position, and why or why not? And does this individual have additional responsibilities if you have that particular position?
So in our athletic department, that person is our senior woman administrator, Katie Gerlach, and she has that designation. But it is also really, we've determined it needs to be a set of shared responsibilities within the department as well. So we all team up and work together in issues of diversity and inclusion. We also have our head track and field and cross country coach, Rosalind Joseph, is our athletics representative on the institution's diversity, equity, and inclusion group led by Todd Bryson. So we try to make sure that the responsibility doesn't fall on one person's shoulders. We do have several designees and try to work together on it as well.
Okay. Someone asked, as a minority candidate, how can I just get my foot in the door?
I think from personal experience, it all comes down to more of who you know than what you know sometimes. And, you know, Mrs. Jude talked about it pretty eloquently earlier, just, you know, when it comes to networking, being a part of groups, you know, reaching out to see what programs there might be to get, maybe if you're part of an underserved minority, that you can get that foot in the door. I mean, it can be very difficult. You know, you hear the quote all the time: people hire people who look like them a lot. And so when you're talking about diversity in particular in the NCAA, you know, at the administration level and at the coaching level, you know, the percentage of white versus people of color in positions of power is very high. And so, you know, networking with the right people, I know China said that earlier, and being really strategic about who you know is very important. And that would be the way that I would tell someone to do it.
Outside of your coaching staff, how many administrators of color are currently members of your staff, and how many hold senior level positions?
I currently have one individual who's a minority, have a very strong interest in increasing that, and had some plans to do so before COVID hit. And we had some positions that were new that I want to create that we haven't quite been able to do. But it's important. It's extremely important. And you know, one of the comments I want to make, you know, to Marcus's point, you know, for the young minority saying, hey, how do I get my foot in the door? All the things that Marcus talked about are true, and the things that and suggestions that China had. What we do a really bad job of as administrators is going out and actively looking for and recruiting and saying, we're going to hire Black males and females for these positions, especially in the lower and entry level positions, so that there are people who are, we need a larger pool of qualified minorities for middle management positions, which then over time, then you'll have even a larger one. And it's because, to Marcus's point, people want to hire people who look like them. And I'll give you know, two examples. I hired a Black females women's basketball coach at UMBC because I knew her and I knew people who knew her, and there was a relationship, and I knew that it was going to be the right fit. That was something I actively did because it was important. I did the same thing on the men's basketball side. And so it's building those relationships with a very diverse group of individuals. And you know, you hear people in our business talk about shortlists. Well, your shortlist should always have some minorities, especially as a white male. It should always have it. Mine does. It's that because you're better. Like I said earlier, nobody served unless everybody served.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I would just for Carbondale, we have 3 minorities in our administrative group. One of them is a senior level administrator.
I wanted to chime in on that. One of the things that our viewers need to take into consideration, and forgive me for repeating myself, but I cannot stress this enough. Sometimes you have to go somewhere that is outside of your comfort zone to get the experience. And I know that that may be a problem or a challenge if you have children, or if you have a spouse, or some type of family dynamics that may hinder that discussion. But those are the conversations that you have to have. I remember when I made the decision to leave New York City to go to Wyoming, I knew that I was going there for a specific reason, to work for a great athletic director, a flagship institution, great football, definitely wanted football. And I wanted to get to learn something different than being on the East Coast. Because at times in this industry, you're typecast. You only can work in a particular division, or you can only work on a certain part of the country. And that is not helpful. I mean, look, Tim went East Coast and then went to Midwest. Liz was in the Mountain West and she's in the Midwest. You have to consider stepping outside of that comfort zone. And sometimes taking positions that either that are less in salary, or in the case that I did, I went from an assistant vice president to a senior associate. I wasn't even the number 2. Although I was the highest ranking woman in Wyoming, actually on the pecking order, I was really number 5. So I took a significant pay cut and a position cut. But I felt so confident in myself and being very honest, having a candid conversation with the athletic director of why I'm doing this. I knew that it was going to pay off in the long run. So stepping outside of our comfort zone can help too.
China, I just want to echo that. Just as a woman in this field, that has been my precise experience. And I have found people will ask me that question now that I'm older. How did I get to where I went? Well, I mean, there was no predetermined path, but there was. You need to have an open mind to do a variety of things and not expect to get the head chair right off the gate, but do a variety of things and be as good as you can at that job so that the next job comes your way. But if you always have your eye on the next job is never gonna come.
I think this may be the last question, and this is to all panelists. Do you believe college athletes should be paid?
Yes, no question. No question. They should be paid. I mean, sport is big business. And I mean, if we just look at the stats, what a lot of, these schools and the NCAA is making and what they're returning back into the student population it's significantly small. And I think that, even with scholarships, right? And so I think that, yes, I think, that should be a thing, no question.
It's a complicated topic for sure. Do I believe that NIL is right? Like I mentioned earlier, yes. Do I believe that that student athletes should have the ability to make money for their name, image, and likeness? Yes, I do. Do I think, for all of the reasons that everybody on this call probably has read or listened to on podcasts or heard, when you delve into that, well, you're being paid because you're an employee. Now that's some real gray area. And Rodrick probably knows this from his time at Northwestern, but when a number of years ago, Northwest, there was a talk about unionization, and saying that student athletes should be paid, and talking about, well, what is the definition of an employee? So if you're being paid, then you're an employee of, let's just say, for example, of the football. Okay, well, what would have to be put in place would have to mirror what is in place for other employees. That you could be demoted, you would have to pay taxes, all of those things that surround actually being an employee. And then, is that really part of the educational experience? No, it's probably not part of the educational experience. Now you are an employee, because if you're receiving the compensation saying we're being paid, we should be like employees, then there's all those other things that come along with that. The opponents of that would say, I think student athletes should be compensated on a model similar to the ones that are being discussed right now, relative to them being able to get monetary compensation for their name, image, and likeness. Should they be paid and treated like full-fledged employees of a for-profit enterprise? No.
I would add to that, there's this misconception out there that every athletic department in the country operates in the big money revenue that the Power Fives do. And I know for us, our football program costs us $4 million a year, over $2 million in scholarships alone, and ticket sales are $350,000. So there's not a surplus revenue at institutions at our level, and so the conversation might be more appropriately applied if it's parsed out by levels. Which that in itself scares me, because then we're looking at the Power Fives just removing themselves from competing with the G5 or FCS level or non-football mid-majors, and that hurts me when I think about the collegiate model. And then I also have concerns about what does it mean for those Olympic sport athletes, the track and field student athletes, the golfers, the swimmers, and where's the equity there? So I think it's a fascinating conversation and concept, but needs to be considered at a much more in-depth level than just the assumption that athletics makes big money.
I think Rodrick, you want to?
Oh yeah, I would say I do agree with everyone who's on the call. Me, I have just a little bit of a bias, being a student athlete. I feel like we should be paid. And I remember having a conversation about this last year with AD at Northwestern at the time, Dr. Jim Phillips, and we were talking about, we had a whole meeting about the possibility of the name, image, and likeness, and what would go with it, and how people could go to a car dealership, and if they want it, they can give you a car, things like that. And as the conversation started to go, we realized, like, okay, this would definitely benefit people in the Power Five conference, the bigger names such as like Trevor Lawrence or quarterbacks and things like that. And then we started to think about, like, okay, but what about the offensive line? And we're strictly talking about football here because that's the conversation that we had. But I can only imagine, just like in other sports, the equity of, like, okay, who's getting paid, how much, just a lot of different things that still have to be figured out. But there's also a lot of money that is coming in from the sports that we play, especially football and basketball. And I know that all schools don't make the same amount. So that's the challenge, that I have. But innately, I want to say, I feel like student athletes should definitely, be paid, just from the time and the sacrifice. And I know people are like, oh, okay, well, you're on scholarship, you're getting your education paid for and things like that. But the reality of the situation is sometimes, a stipend every month isn't enough. Sometimes people have certain situations where, they have to send that money back home. And you just kind of never know. And it's like you're making all this money for the university, and it's just kind of like, what do you really get in return, especially if you're not, getting your degree. So that's my stance on it.
I wanted to jump in on that. So there are 1,100 NCAA institutions, 130 FBSs, 65 Power Fives. This whole conversation is pretty much about 65 institutions, give or take, 5% plus minus probably. And that's where the struggle comes in at, because the question we have to ask ourselves, are we changing an entire system for 65 institutions? And that's the reason why I believe that when the Knight Commission came out and put those recommendations out to split or to segregate, as Tim mentioned, segregate a number of those institutions to create this autonomous group. The mindset is, okay, let them do their thing. Now you can regulate as you see fit when it comes to those particular issues of money. Problem is that how do you handle basketball? Basketball is what drives the entire train in the NCAA. That basketball revenue is what pays for leadership programs, takes student athletes on professional development, the monies to help kids, different grants and things like that, that a lot of institutions like SIU and SIUE take advantage of. And even me coming from a Division II institution helped in some regards. So it is kind of a catch-22, but in going back to the question that Dr. Hughes asked about, the student athletes who think that they can go pro, why do they still do it? We're talking about less than 1%. 1% of the big three, football and basketball, men's and women's basketball. But now we have social media influencers. We have the models and the makeup artists and the bloggers and the vloggers and all of those individuals who are now benefiting or can benefit from social media. Personally, I don't think it's about the money part. I think it's about the tracking part. How do you track them? How do they report? How do you teach student athletes who maybe are doing well in their classes, and some may not be doing well, but now we're going to teach them about taxes and 1099s, tax accountants, and now we're taking it to a whole another level. And guess what? The lone compliance officer or the compliance officer with a part-timer or a GA is not going to be able to monitor all that. That's a lot of chasing around. So I'm going to be totally honest. I'm a purist. I'm a former Division I student athlete myself in Olympic sport volleyball. We did not have that opportunity, but if we don't get our monitoring, our tracking, and our accountability measures, it's going to be a challenge. But I'm hopeful, because I remember when APRs was a big thing and everybody was running around, nervous about APRs. And we actually managed that. Unfortunately, it was managed by, building an airplane while it was flying in the air. Made a lot of mistakes. So I anticipate it's going to be something very similar.
I think it's important to add too that when it comes to scholarship and the scholarship model, even within the Power Five, let alone G5 or other conferences, is not equal. Every student athlete is not on a full scholarship. Every student athlete does not get that $3,000 stipend. And in fact, the majority of student athletes that play in the NCAA are on small scholarships and have to take student loans and things like that. And so, you know, when you're talking about paying a student athlete, you might need to look at building some equity in terms of scholarship and the scholarship model before we even talk about paying and what that looks like.
Okay. I have one more question, looks like. Well, they're telling me to wrap up now. So, Dr. Mahoney, do you do the wrap up?
I do the wrap up, yeah. And so
Okay.
I will, I think we've got about a minute left. I may go slightly over, but that's okay. First of all, I want to say, for those who are interested, just remind people you can subscribe to the SIU System YouTube page and follow events like this going forward. And so I encourage you to do that before you log off tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists for their insight into the issues that we were bringing up relative to race and athletics. I've actually been teaching related to this for many, many years, and Dean Hughes and I are actually teaching together. So I've heard her say some of the things she said tonight in class, and it's fun to hear her talk about it again. And when I think about race and athletics, I often think about it looking at it in two lenses. One is the discrimination that we see in sport, but also how sport can be utilized to address larger issues of discrimination in society, both of which I think we hit on in different ways throughout this conversation. And again, just some of the comments I think I heard from all of you, the importance certainly of the search processes that we use in finding diversity. You know, Tim talked about, and I think that's a great point, and I've reinforced that with athletic directors I work with, of having a short list that's diverse, because athletic searches go very fast. And if you don't think about that on the front end, then you're not going to have diversity. And then you end up in situations like Marcus talked about, that you have one, and you have a person who's lonely and doesn't feel part of it, and that leads to retention issues and other problems as well. And I think it also leads to the issue that Liz talked about some, which is that having different perspectives, different strengths on your leadership team makes you better leaders and allows you to focus on this more. I think one of the things that always stuck with me, I was at the University of Louisville many years ago, and we were going through the NCAA certification process, and we didn't have enough women's sports. And so the comment was, well, we're going to add lacrosse and equestrian. And I shouted from the end of the table, could we add a sport that's just not white, rich white women? Can we do something that adds diversity as well relative to race? The problem is no one who is in that decision-making process ever even considered that. The only people who did were me and two African-American men who were sitting next to me. Were all like, yeah, this is a problem. No one else in the room seemed to understand that was a problem. So when you don't have that diversity, then you end up kind of reinforcing some of this discrimination, and you don't provide the opportunities, and we end up with some of the issues that we have today. I did very much was thinking about some of Rodrick's comments just about the stereotypes we still have of athletes, particularly Black athletes, which relates, I think, very closely to what Dean Hughes talked about of why we're concerned if they're not making it pro, and why we're concerned about some of these issues is because we believe that somehow they're not as academically adept, not as smart, not having a backup plan, where we never really worry about the Andre Agassi's and Pete Sampras's and Jennifer Capriati's who never went to college and went directly to pro. That didn't seem to be an issue for us, but for Black athletes, it seems to be a much bigger issue. So we do have discrimination issues in how we view athletes. But when it comes to how we use sport to utilize change in larger society, obviously a lot of what Dr. Smith talked about the social activism, and both the way athletes have an opportunity to be inspirational, and they have power in their roles, and we're certainly seeing them using it more. Missouri was a good example, and even athletic organizations like Dr. Jude talked about with Major League Baseball moving their game from Atlanta. There's those opportunities to have that type of an impact, and sport I think continues to, and probably even more so today than ever before. And I'll kind of end with, I think, a little bit with Dr. Jude. I'm going to have you come to my class next year, because every time I do my class, the first thing I talk about is that the most important social institution in America is economics. And you cannot look at anything that happens in America without understanding economics is behind almost everything. And so by the end of my class, the students, when I talk about things, will also start doing this all the time. because we know it's money related, a lot of those things. And I think we saw that even in, again, the social activism had an impact, because not playing a football game has an impact. Not having a baseball game in Atlanta has an impact. That the money impact is a big part of it. And that is one of the ways you start to use sport to really move forward with social change. And so I think we hit, again, a lot of those great topics. Again, thank tonight's panel for all the insights you brought to this conversation. And really want to thank everyone who's been involved with the conversations during this academic year. I've certainly learned a lot. I've enjoyed being able to participate in it. And again, I hope you all will join us again next year when we start doing some new conversations on some different topics. So thank you and good night.